Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be our next video on environmental science, and specifically going over biomes. Let's get started on this next video. So if we go through and look at these images here, what is the difference between a forest and a desert? Well, if we look at the difference here, they are two separate biomes with unique features within each environment. Now, these terrestrial biomes that we're going to go through and look at include all areas on Earth where organisms are going to go through and live. The distinguishing features of terrestrial biomes are mainly determined by the climate. In terrestrial biomes like tundras, temperate forests, grasslands, chaparrals, and temperate and tropical deserts, we're going to see these different types of environments due to the climate and due to how the Earth moves around the sun. Now, if we look at this, there's going to be two fundamental factors that affect biomes. The first being temperature and the second being rainfall. These two factors determine what the climate and what the terrestrial biome is going to go through and look like. Now, in order to answer our essential question here, what is the difference between a forest and a desert, we have to understand how the Earth moves around the sun. Now, if we look at the Earth in a little more detail, we're going to see a couple things that are going to distinguish how it moves. Through the center of the Earth, we have the equator, and we can draw a line through the center of the Earth and offset it by 23.4 degrees. That's going to be the axis in which the Earth spins. So the Earth is spinning on an axis, or it's tilted slightly to the right. Now, what we can see is above the equator in the north, we're going to see the northern hemisphere, and then below the equator in the south, we see the southern hemisphere. We can go through and distinguish these hemispheres by going through and looking at the relationship between the axis and the equator. Now, in this image, when the Earth is on the left-hand side of the sun, we're going to see more direct sunlight hit the northern hemisphere, and we're going to see less direct sunlight hit the southern hemisphere. So in this case, the northern hemisphere experiences summer and the southern hemisphere experiences winter. Now, as the Earth moves around and orbits, what we see is when it goes over to the right-hand side of the sun, now the southern hemisphere experiences more direct sunlight, and as a result, the southern hemisphere experiences summer and the northern hemisphere experiences winter. So if we look at sunlight going through and hitting the equator here, we can see that more sunlight is going to be distributed over a small area, which is going to go through and increase the temperature at the equator. And what we can see in the northern hemisphere is we have a larger area in which the light is going through and being dissipated. So since light is distributed over a larger area, it's going to result in a lower temperature. Now, not only are there going to be different climates affected by where they are in relationship with the equator, but it's going to depend upon where they are in relationship to the orbit around the sun. So what we can see here is the northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun now. Because the northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun, it's getting more direct sunlight as compared to the southern hemisphere. And this is why we see summer in the northern hemisphere and winter in the southern. And again, this is due to how the light is getting dissipated because of the southern hemisphere being tilted away from the sun, so it's experiencing less light. Now, as the Earth moves around in its orbit, we're going to see the opposite when it moves onto the other side of the sun. We're seeing more sunlight being dissipated over a larger area, so the northern hemisphere receives less sunlight, the southern hemisphere receives more. So as a result, we see that the northern hemisphere experiences winter while the southern hemisphere experiences summer. It has to do with light dissipation and the tilt of the Earth's axis. Now, biomes are going to differ dependent upon where they are in relationship to the equator. So what we're going to see is tropical biomes are going to be adapted for warmer climates closer to the equator. And we can see cooler biomes are adapted for cool and cold temperatures, and we see something in between. And what we're going to see is a difference in biomes and organisms dependent upon what biome they are in and dependent upon the climate, which is ultimately dependent upon the tilt of the Earth's axis and how the light gets dissipated. Now remember, rainfall is also going to affect the biome, so we have to keep this in mind. If we look at this infographic here, what we can see is biomes rainfall versus temperature. Now, on the x-axis, we can see average annual temperature here, and that's going to go anywhere from negative 20 degrees Celsius, and it's going to go all the way up to 30 degrees Celsius. And then on the y-axis here, we can see rainfall, average annual rainfall in centimeters. Now we're going to see different biomes are going to be dependent upon the rainfall versus temperature. We're going to see tundras are going to experience low temperatures and low average rainfall. Deserts experience high temperatures but low average rainfall. And then as we move up, we can see grasslands here, temperate deciduous forests, and then we can also see arboreal forest here. And it's going to be this relationship between rainfall and average annual temperature. Both of these factors are going to play an important part in exactly what biome we see. So what is a biome? Well, a biome is going to be one of these 8 types here. We're going to see temperate grasslands, savannas, we're going to see tundras, deciduous forests, rainforests, deserts, Arctic, and boreal forests here. And all of these are dependent upon where they are, the relationship as to where they are near the equator, and the amount of rainfall that they get. All right, so this is going to be the end of the video. Did you learn? Did you learn a couple of things? Did you learn why Earth experiences seasons and varying climates? Did you learn the role of precipitation and how that role plays an effect on what type of biome we see? And then lastly here, did you get an overview of the biomes? This is going to be the end of the video, and we'll see you all in class tomorrow.